Hello, welcome to Regime Technologies. I'm Venkat. This is part 25 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about datetime data types, datetime functions, and understand the terms UTC time and time zone offset. In SQL Server, there are several data types as far as datetime is concerned. Time, date, small date time, etc. Now, depending on the requirement of the application, we choose the appropriate datetime data type. For example, if I want to store only the date of birth of a person, then it's enough if I choose the date data type. On the other hand, instead of choosing date data type, if you choose date time, let's say I want to store only the date of birth. I don't want to capture the time, but instead of choosing date data type, I've chosen data type, date time data type. What is the disadvantage of doing so? If you look at date time data type, it has got 8 bytes the size, but whereas date data type is only 3 bytes. So when it's not required to capture the time, then probably it makes sense to choose the date data type alone rather than choosing date time data type. So on the other hand, let's say I want to store the time as well. Maybe that's when we choose the date time data type. Okay, maybe I want to store only the time. In those cases, maybe I'll choose the time data type. Okay, or if I want more precision for the nanoseconds, then I choose date time to data type. So here, year, month, date, hours, milliseconds, minutes, seconds, and nanoseconds. So there is more precision for nanoseconds here in date time too when we compare that with date time. Okay, now we have this datetime offset. Let us understand what we mean by datetime offset. Now if you look at the datetime offset, it's pretty much similar to datetime too. Okay, we have years, month, days, and then hours, minutes, seconds, nanoseconds, and then you have got some plus, optionally plus or minus symbol, and then you've got hours and minutes. Okay, so this piece here, the plus or minus hours and minutes, this is called the time zone offset. And this time, when you use datetime offset data type, this time is usually in UTC time. Okay, this falls in UTC time zone. Now let us understand what exactly do we mean by UTC time and the time zone offset. Okay, so UTC basically stands for Coordinated Universal Time. Now here is another confusion. UTC, but if you look at Coordinated Universal Time, it is CUT. So how is this an expanded form of this abbreviation? Now there are some political reasons behind why they have actually abbreviated it like this, but actually this stands for Coordinated Universal Time. Now we'll understand the concepts behind what do we mean by coordinated universal time and the time zone offset, rather than worrying about the political reasons behind abbreviating it like that. So UTC stands for Coordinated Universal Time. So basically this UTC is the you know is the central time based on which the world regulates clocks and time. Okay, now UTC, and there is another time zone called GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, they're actually synonymous with each other for all common purposes, but however there are very slight differences, but most of the time GMT and UTC are synonymous for all common purposes. Okay, so what do we mean by this UTC? Okay, to understand this practically, all of us have worked with the clock in Windows operating system. So if I open the clock in Windows operating system, let's say I want to change the date and time settings. I click that, and when we go to change time zone, so if you look at this time zone here, and if I drop this list down, you look at this, these are all the time zones, if not all, most of the time zones in the world. Okay, now if you look at this, there is something called UTC here, which is nothing but Coordinated Universal Time. Okay, and then if you look some of these here, so UTC plus 2 hours, UTC plus 3 hours. Okay, so this UTC is the coordinated universal time, the central, I can say, the world standard time, based on which other clocks and times in different time zones are calculated. Okay, so if in UTC the time is 12 o'clock at the minute, then if we want to calculate what is the time in Germany, which is Berlin, so if it is 12 o'clock in UTC, coordinated universal time, in Germany it's 12 hours, I mean 12 in the noon plus 1, which means 13 hours, 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Germany. Okay, on the other hand, if we want to find out what's the time in New Delhi, so New Delhi is around 5.5 hours from UTC, which is India. So the time in, I mean, in UTC time zone, if it's 12 o'clock, then it's 5:30 in the evening in India. Okay, so all the other time zones are based on UTC. So that plus or minus hours. So if you have to look at the countries on the negative side, I mean on the minus side, UTC minus something. Look at this. Central America is UTC minus 6 hours. So this minus plus or minus thing is nothing but the offset from the UTC time zone. Okay, now I am right now in London, so if you look at the time right now in London, it is 22:18. Now let me try to switch my time zone to UTC and see what happens. So when I select UTC, coordinated universal time, look at this. Current date and time on my machine is 22:18, which is 10 o'clock in the night. Okay, but UTC time is 21:19, which means London's time is actually 1 hour ahead of the UTC time. Okay, but if you look at the London time zone here, we don't have that plus 1 hour extra here. Okay, it just says, okay, UTC coordinated universal time, and then UTC Dublin, Edinburgh, Lisbon, London. Okay, but then if you look at the time that I have selected, there is 1 hour difference. Okay, there was 1 hour difference because, so if I select London, let's cancel that, let's go back, change date and time, change time zone. Look at this, it's 22:19. Now if I select UTC time, so there is 1 hour difference between UTC and London, but then it doesn't show up in that drop down list. So why is that? That's because there is another concept called daylight savings. Okay, so since this is summer here, we actually have moved our clocks, 1 hour, you know 1 hour forward, because of which we are getting that difference between the UTC time and the time in London. Otherwise, in winter again we'll move it backwards and UTC time matches with London's time. So that's why daylight savings are not taken into consideration here. That's the reason why you see that difference when I change the date here. Okay, so I hope it's clear what is UTC time and time zone. Okay, alright, so in order to understand these different data types, I've created a very simple table here called TBL DateTime, and I have used all the DateTime data types that are available, time, date, small DateTime, etc. in this table, just to show you practically how the data gets stored in the table. So if you look at this, we have this column CTime, which is time data type. CDate is just date data type. Small date time is small date time. I have included C underscore just to give it a C underscore indicates column in that table. It's about that. So when I select all the rows from this table, we don't have any data in those columns. Okay, let's try and insert some data into these columns. Okay, now look at this. In order to get a system date and time, the current date and time in SQL Server, I can use a function called getDate. We have spoken about many string functions. For example, substring, lower, upper. Just like all these functions, to work with datetime data types, we have datetime functions, and one of the very common functions that we use is getDate, which will basically give us the current system date and time. So when I execute that, I get the current system date and time. Now I'm using this function instead of typing in the values for time, date, small date, time, for all these columns. I am actually using this method. Okay, so it's going to return, if you look at this, select get date, it's going to return the current system date and time. Okay, year, month, days, hour, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds, I mean nanoseconds rather. Okay, so now when I try to execute this query, so one row affected, which means one row got inserted into this table called TBL datetime. So if I select this, look at this, time is only storing the time, hours, minutes, seconds, and the nanoseconds. So which is nothing but our time data type, hours, minutes, seconds, and nanoseconds. And along the same lines, if you look at datetime offset, so it's storing year, month, days, hours, minutes, seconds, nanoseconds, and the time zone offset. Now since getDate, if you see the time zone offset difference, it's only 00 here. That's because when I say getDate, it doesn't give any value for time zone offset. So that's why you see the time zone offset difference is plus 00. On the other hand, if you want to update that, you can update with any time zone offset. But if you want to store the time zone offset in datetime2 data type or datetime data type, it's not practically possible. It doesn't allow you to do that. Okay, so let's quickly update it with some offset. So I want to say the offset is maybe plus 1 hour for this time. I've just written the update query beforehand, in order to save time in typing. So when I press F5, you should see we got an offset there. It's 10 hours. Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so these are some of the functions that we can use in SQL Server to get the current system date and time. In SQL Server, we have just seen how to use getDate function to return the current system date and time. Okay, on my computer I have SQL Server installed. So on the computer where you have SQL Server installed, if you want to get the time and date from that machine, then you can use select getDate. Okay, let's say if I am connected to SQL Server using a SQL Server Management Studio from a different computer, and when I connect to that SQL Server from SQL Server Management Studio installed on that client computer, and when I execute select get date, I get the date and time of where you have the SQL Server installed rather than on your computer from which you have connected to SQL Server. Okay, so apart from getDate, you can also use various other functions like current timestamp, system date time offset, get UTC date, and sys UTC date time. So if you look at these functions, they return the current date and time in different formats. Okay, so for example, we have just spoken about what is UTC time and the time zone offset. So if you want, maybe the time zone offset as well, you can use system sys datetime offset. That will give you the time in UTC, I mean date time in UTC, and then the offset, the difference. Okay, so if you look at sys datetime offset, so I've got the time in UTC and 1 hour is the difference. Now right now in London the time is 22:26, okay, which is 1 hour ahead of the UTC time. Okay, so along the same lines you have these other functions. So depending on your requirement, how you want to retrieve the date and time, you choose that function. So, and out of these functions, getDate is very commonly used. If you look at current timestamp and getDate, they're written exactly the same date and time format. The only difference between them is current timestamp is an ANSI SQL equivalent to getDate. Okay, whereas sys datetime gives us more fractional seconds precision. Okay, since date time offset, which we have just seen, you have more fractional seconds precision plus the time zone offset. And if you want the UTC date and time, you use get UTC date time, and along the same lines sys UTC date time, okay, which has more fractional seconds precision along with UTC date time. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.